A single compromised machine is rarely the real danger. The real catastrophe begins when that machine stops being just an endpoint and quietly turns into a launchpad, a system that starts scanning, probing, and infecting everything it can reach, often before anyone even notices something is wrong. Welcome to BlueHat Cybersec Academy. That is the core idea behind a network worm. Malware that doesn't just run on a system, but moves through networks on its own. And often, it does that faster than defenders can react. This video breaks down network worms in the Malware Encyclopedia series from a practical, analytical angle. How they work, why they are uniquely dangerous compared to other malware, how they historically reshaped cybersecurity, and what realistic defenses actually matter when speed, automation, and network trust all become attack surfaces. What makes a network worm fundamentally different is often misunderstood at first glance. People tend to confuse worms with viruses, but the difference is not just technical. It completely changes how the attack behaves in real environments. A virus typically needs human action. Someone has to open a file, run a program, or execute a payload for it to continue spreading. A network worm, on the other hand, is designed for autonomy. It actively searches for new victims and replicates itself across systems without requiring any further user interaction after the initial infection. And this is where its defining characteristics come into play. It performs self-propagation by scanning networks for vulnerable systems. It operates with independence, meaning it does not need a host file or repeated user execution. It gains network speed scaling, where every infected system becomes another propagation engine, and it demonstrates network awareness by leveraging IP ranges, shared services, and protocol weaknesses. This autonomy is exactly what turns worms from isolated malware incidents into full-scale network events. Now, when we look at the real mechanics of how worms move through systems, it becomes clear they don't behave randomly. Instead, they follow structured logic, often surprisingly efficient logic. The first stage is target discovery, also known as the scanning phase. In this stage, the worm begins identifying potential victims by scanning IP ranges, often within local subnets or broader internet blocks. It looks for open ports, especially exposed services like SMB, RDP, SSH, or HTTP. It may also probe for known vulnerable service signatures. Speed becomes critical here. A worm that scans sequentially is slow and predictable and easier to detect. Modern worms, however, often use randomized or parallel scanning techniques to avoid detection while maximizing reach. Once targets are identified, the worm moves into the exploitation phase. Here, it attempts to gain access using unpatched software vulnerabilities, weak authentication credentials, or misconfigured services exposed to the network. And this is a crucial observation. Worms don't always need exotic 0 days. In fact, many of the most damaging outbreaks in history have relied on something much simpler: delayed patching cycles and known vulnerabilities that were never fully addressed. After exploitation comes payload deployment. At this stage, the worm copies itself onto the new system, executes automatically through mechanisms like services, scheduled tasks, or memory injection, and establishes persistence so it survives reboots. Once that happens, the system is no longer just compromised, it becomes part of the propagation chain. And then the cycle repeats. The newly infected machine immediately begins scanning again, and this is where things escalate quickly, because infection doesn't grow in a straight line. It multiplies. When we talk about why worms are uniquely destructive in modern networks, the key concept is not just infection, but network amplification. One of the most important factors is exponential spread, and it is unforgiving. A single worm-infected machine can compromise dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of systems in minutes if conditions are right. Unlike phishing or Trojans, there is no dependency on human decision-making after the initial entry. That removes the slowest link in the attack chain, the user. Another major factor is how worms exploit trust inside networks. Many environments operate under the assumption that internal traffic is safe enough. Worms take advantage of exactly this assumption. Once inside, Internal firewalls are often weaker. Authentication may be reused across systems, and legacy systems are more common and less frequently patched. In other words, worms do not just attack vulnerabilities, they attack architectural assumptions. Then there is detection difficulty. By the time abnormal traffic is noticed, propagation may already be widespread. Worms often generate high volumes of outbound connection attempts, short-lived connections that evade basic logging thresholds, and traffic that can resemble legitimate network discovery tools. So security teams often discover worms not at the entry point, but at the point of saturation. To understand why worms change cybersecurity thinking, it helps to look at their historical impact. In the early Internet era, worms demonstrated that the Internet itself could become an infection vector at global scale. A well-known example is the Morris worm from 1988. It didn't rely on advanced payloads, it exploited relatively simple vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, yet it still caused widespread disruption across early Internet systems. Later, in the enterprise era, worms like SQL Slammer and Blaster introduced a more alarming lesson. Speed matters more than complexity. These worms propagated so quickly that some networks were overwhelmed before patch cycles could even respond. The key lesson from this history is simple but important. Worms do not require perfect code. They require one widely exposed vulnerability, a fast propagation mechanism, and enough connected systems running similar software. And that combination is still very much present in modern environments. In today's world, worms have evolved significantly. Classic worms were loud, noisy, aggressive, and easy to notice. Modern worms behave differently. Instead of attacking everything at once, they are often more selective. They may target specific industries like finance, healthcare, or cloud infrastructure. They may use credential theft before propagation to reduce detection risk. They may limit scan rates so they don't trigger security systems. And they often blend into legitimate network behavior patterns. Some go even further by becoming modular. This means attackers can change behavior after deployment, effectively turning a worm into a flexible delivery system for ransomware, spyware, or data exfiltration tools. So in simple terms, worms have evolved from network firestorms into quiet expansion mechanisms. Now, when we shift to defensive reality, the important point is that defending against worms is not about one single tool. It is about reducing the conditions that allow uncontrolled movement. The most decisive factor remains patch discipline. Most worm outbreaks are not caused by unknown vulnerabilities. They are caused by known ones that were never patched. Delayed patching is still one of the most consistent root causes. Then comes network segmentation. Flat networks are ideal environments for worms because they allow unrestricted lateral movement. Segmentation helps limit how far a worm can spread by separating critical systems, restricting movement between departments, and applying least privilege access across the network. Another important layer is intrusion detection focused on behavior rather than signatures. Signature-based detection struggles with new or modified worms. Behavioral detection is stronger because it looks for unusual internal scanning patterns, spikes in connection attempts across multiple systems, and repeated authentication failures distributed across hosts. Rate limiting and egress controls also matter. Since worms rely heavily on outbound connectivity, controlling outbound traffic can significantly slow or disrupt propagation. And finally, there is zero trust thinking, but in a practical sense, not as a buzzword. It means not assuming internal systems are safe by default, enforcing authentication and authorization for all communications, and continuously validating trust relationships. The uncomfortable truth about worms is that they are not just malware. They are stress tests for network architecture. If a worm spreads easily inside a system, it usually reveals deeper structural issues, over-trusted internal networks, slow or inconsistent patch cycles, excessive exposure of services, weak segmentation between systems, and poor visibility into lateral traffic. In that sense, worms are less of an anomaly and more of an audit mechanism, one that arrives uninvited and reports its findings through disruption. And now, as we close this out, here's something worth thinking about. Network worms remain relevant, not because they are new or exotic, but because they exploit long-standing realities of computing interconnected systems, imperfect patching, and implicit trust inside networks. They scale faster than human response cycles, and that imbalance is their core advantage. The most important shift in thinking is this: worms are not break-in tools. They are spread-out tools. And once that distinction is understood, the defense strategy changes fundamentally, from protecting entry points to controlling movement. In modern cybersecurity, preventing intrusion is difficult. Preventing uncontrolled propagation, that is where real resilience is built. So here's a challenge for you. If a worm entered your network right now, would it be stopped within seconds, or would it silently spread across systems before anyone even notices? And be specific. What would it hit first in your environment? A user workstation, a file server, or an exposed remote service? Drop your answer in the comments and justify your reasoning like you're analyzing a real incident. And one step deeper, what single control in your environment do you think would slow it down the most, and why? If you enjoyed this breakdown, you're already thinking in the right direction. This is exactly the kind of attacker-focused, system-level analysis we build in the Malware Encyclopedia series. So like, share, and subscribe to BlueHat Cybersec Academy for more deep-dive cybersecurity breakdowns, where we don't just define malware, we dissect how it actually behaves in real networks and what it really takes to stop it.